The funeral reception tasted like betrayal. James Carter stood by the window of his childhood home in Seattle, watching rain blur the glass while mourners whispered about his mother, Linda Carter, who had died just 3 days ago. Everyone knew her as a humble teacher at Lincoln High School. No one knew about the locked office upstairs containing secrets worth $90 billion in real estate assets spanning 47 countries. His wife of 6 years, Rachel, hadn't shed a single tear during the service. But James noticed how her hand kept finding its way to his best friend Mike's arm, their fingers intertwining when they thought no one was watching. The lawyer, Mr. Peterson, had requested James stay after everyone left for urgent matters regarding his mother's estate. But Rachel announced she was filing for divorce that very afternoon, moving out to marry Mike within the month. She was completely unaware that the modest house she was eager to abandon sat on property documents that would make James the controller of a hidden empire, including the very building where she worked and a luxury apartment where Mike lived. When Mike actually laughed, during what he assumed was a worthless will reading, calling James a pathetic teacher who inherited nothing but dust and old books, Rachel joined in. Neither of them saw Mr. Peterson's face go pale as he opened the sealed envelope marked "For my son's eyes only." If you're enjoying this story of hidden wealth and ultimate revenge, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales. Drop a comment below telling us what you would do with $90 billion. New stories every week. Don't miss what happens next. The funeral had ended an hour ago, but the house still smelled of lilies and regret. Linda Carter's body had been laid to rest beside James's father, Robert, who died when James was 7, a loss that shaped every moment of the 33 years that followed. James stood in the living room of the modest craftsman house in suburban Seattle, watching the last mourners filter out into the gray October afternoon. His mother had worked as a history teacher at Lincoln High School for 42 years, but the turnout had been surprisingly small. Rachel stood across the room, her black dress elegant but impersonal, checking her phone every few minutes with barely concealed impatience. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, makeup flawless, more appropriate for a business meeting than a funeral. They'd been married for 6 years, but in the past 18 months, something fundamental had shifted. She worked late constantly, her marketing firm position consuming her nights and weekends. James had tried to be understanding, supportive, the kind of husband who didn't complain when dinner went cold. Mike Sullivan stood beside Rachel, his hand resting on the small of her back, a gesture far too familiar, too possessive. Mike had been James's best friend since college at the University of Washington, class of 2014. Mike had gone into finance, while James followed his mother's footsteps into teaching. Mike wore his success like armor, the Rolex that caught the light, the custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than James's monthly salary, the confident smirk that suggested he'd won at life while James had settled for participation. James, Mr. Peterson's voice cut through his thoughts. The elderly lawyer stood in the doorway, silver hair immaculate, navy suit pressed to sharp lines. "We need to speak privately. It's about your mother's estate." Rachel's head snapped up from her phone. "I should be there for this," she said, moving toward James for the first time that day. "We're still married. Community property applies to inheritances in Washington state." "Actually," Mr. Peterson said carefully, "it doesn't." And Mrs. Carter was quite specific about privacy. "James only." Mike laughed, a sound that had once been familiar and warm, but now struck James as sharp, cruel. "Don't worry, Peterson. There's probably nothing to inherit anyway. Linda was a teacher, for God's sake. What did she leave him? A collection of lesson plans." Several remaining mourners turned at the comment's volume and callousness, but Mike seemed oblivious to their disapproving stares. "Mike," James said quietly, "that's my mother you're talking about. She died 3 days ago. And I'm sorry for your loss, buddy. Truly." Mike's tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just being realistic. Your mom was a lovely woman, but she lived paycheck to paycheck. You've been covering her medical bills for the last 2 years. There's probably more debt than assets." The observation was accurate, but its delivery was deliberately cruel. Linda's cancer treatment had been aggressive and expensive, and James had liquidated his modest savings to cover what insurance wouldn't. "If you'll follow me, James," Mr. Peterson said, gesturing toward Linda's home office, a room James had rarely entered. His mother had always been private about her workspace, keeping the door locked. "I'm coming," Rachel announced, stepping forward with Mike at her side. Mr. Peterson's expression hardened. Mrs. Carter left explicit instructions. James alone. He opened the office door, and James followed him inside, but not before seeing Rachel's face flush with anger and Mike's smirk deepen with what looked like satisfaction. The door closed with a decisive click, and Mr. Peterson turned the lock. The office was exactly as James remembered. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, an antique oak desk positioned before a window overlooking the backyard, filing cabinets that looked decades old. But Mr. Peterson walked past all of it to a section of bookshelf James had always assumed was fixed. The lawyer pressed something James couldn't see, and the entire section swung inward like a door, revealing a climate-controlled room James had never known existed. "Your mother," Mr. Peterson said softly, "was not who you thought she was." The hidden room was small but sophisticated. Multiple monitors lined one wall, all dark now, but suggesting recent use. Filing cabinets with biometric locks stood against another wall. A large, serious safe occupied the corner. But what drew James's attention was the wall of photographs. Linda Carter standing beside presidents, tech moguls, foreign dignitaries, real estate developers whose names everyone recognized. His mother dressed impeccably in these photos, never in the modest cardigan combinations James associated with her teaching work. "Sit down, James," Mr. Peterson said gently, gesturing to one of two leather chairs. "This will take some time." James sat, his legs feeling disconnected from his body. "I don't understand. Who are these people? Why is my mother?" "Your mother was Linda Carter publicly, but professionally she was known as L.R. King." Mr. Peterson opened his briefcase and withdrew a tablet. "Does that name mean anything to you?" James shook his head, but something nagged at the edge of his memory. A name he'd heard in business news, maybe. "L.R. King Holdings," Mr. Peterson continued, "is one of the most successful private real estate investment companies in the world. Your mother founded it 41 years ago with money she inherited from her father, Robert King, whom you never met because he died before you were born. She built it into an empire through strategic investments, impeccable timing, and an almost supernatural ability to identify properties that would appreciate exponentially." The tablet screen showed a corporate structure chart so complex it looked like neural pathways, but at the center, in clear letters, Linda Ruth King Carter, founder and sole owner. "That's impossible," James whispered. "My mother worked at the high school. I saw her there almost every day until she got sick. She drove a 15-year-old Toyota. She used coupons. She maintained appearances deliberately." Mr. Peterson interrupted gently. "After your father died, she made a choice. She could raise you in the world of extreme wealth with all its dangers and corruptions, or she could give you a normal childhood, teach you values that mattered, ensure you became a good man rather than a spoiled heir. She chose the latter." James's hands were shaking. "The teaching job was real, though. I visited her there. Her coworkers knew her. The job was real, yes, but it was also cover. Lincoln High School received anonymous donations totaling $47 million over the past 40 years, all from your mother, though routed through various foundations. She genuinely loved teaching and wanted to give back, but she also needed a plausible reason to live modestly while managing a global empire." "Ow!" James's voice cracked. "How did she manage all this while working full-time and raising me?" Mr. Peterson smiled sadly. "Your mother slept very little. Those nights, she told you she was grading papers in her office. She was negotiating with developers in Singapore, closing deals in Dubai, managing properties across 6 continents. She hired the best people, paid them extraordinarily well, and demanded absolute discretion." The tablet screen changed, showing property after property. Luxury high-rises in Manhattan, office complexes in Los Angeles, shopping centers in Tokyo, apartment buildings in London, resorts in the Maldives. The list scrolled and scrolled. Hundreds of properties, each marked with acquisition date, current value. and appreciation percentage. The total current valuation, Mr. Peterson said quietly, is $90.3 billion. And as of your mother's death, you are the sole beneficiary. The room tilted, but James gripped the armrests of his chair, forcing himself to breathe. 90 billion, James repeated, the number feeling abstract, unreal. 300 million. Yes, but who's counting? Mr. Peterson's attempt at levity fell flat. Your mother's will is ironclad. The entire estate transfers to you, along with controlling interest in L.R. King Holdings. The management team she built will continue operations, but all major decisions require your approval. You are now, quite literally, one of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. James stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to think. He walked to the wall of photographs, studying his mother's face in each one. She looked powerful in these images, but also tired, carrying a weight he'd never recognized because she'd hidden it so carefully. Why didn't she tell me? Why keep this secret until she died? She left you a letter. Mr. Peterson produced an envelope, cream-colored and heavy, sealed with red wax embossed with the initials LRK. She wanted you to read it before we discuss specifics. James took the envelope with trembling hands, but he couldn't open it yet. Does anyone else know? Rachel? Mike? Anyone at the funeral? No one. Your mother was extraordinarily careful about maintaining separation between her public and private lives. The funeral arrangements, the death certificate, everything listed her as a teacher who died of cancer with minimal assets. The will reading I've scheduled for tomorrow morning was described to your wife as a formality regarding the house and personal effects. She has no idea what's actually in the estate. The mention of Rachel sent James's thoughts spinning in a new direction. There's something else you need to know, Mr. Peterson continued, his expression darkening. Something your mother discovered shortly before she died. Your wife Rachel and your friend Mike Sullivan. They've been having an affair for 18 months. Your mother hired a private investigator after noticing suspicious behavior at a charity event 8 months ago. The investigator's report is in the safe. He paused. I'm sorry, James. Your mother wanted to tell you herself, but the cancer progressed too quickly. The words should have shocked James, but instead they settled over him like confirmation of something he'd known but refused to admit. The late nights, the emotional distance, the way Rachel flinched when he touched her, the way Mike's visits had become more frequent. All of it suddenly made horrible sense. There's more, Mr. Peterson continued carefully. Rachel has been planning to file for divorce. She's already consulted an attorney. Mike's firm, actually, they're waiting until after the funeral out of what they consider respect. But Rachel intends to file papers within a week. She believes she's entitled to half of everything you inherit. James laughed, but the sound was bitter. She thinks there's nothing to inherit. Mike just said so. Exactly, Mr. Peterson agreed. They're operating under the assumption that you're inheriting a modest house, maybe a small life insurance policy, possibly some debt. Rachel's attorney advised her that even community property claims on inheritances are weak in Washington, so she's not expecting much. She's filing for divorce because she wants to marry Mike. The clinical nature of their betrayal was somehow worse than the betrayal itself. They weren't leaving James because of passion or overwhelming love, but because he no longer served their ambitions. Mike lives in Harbor Tower, doesn't he? James heard himself ask. The luxury building downtown? Mr. Peterson consulted his tablet. Yes, Unit 3804. What? My mother owns that building, doesn't she? The lawyer's expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction. She does. Acquired it in 2018 through a subsidiary. It's valued at $670 million currently. And Rachel works at Summit Marketing Solutions. Correct. Whose headquarters building is owned by L.R. King Holdings through the Cascade Commercial Properties subsidiary. Your mother acquired it in 2021 for $820 million. James turned from the photographs to face Mr. Peterson directly. They have no idea, none whatsoever, and how you choose to handle that information is entirely your decision. After Mr. Peterson left, James stood alone in his mother's secret office, holding the sealed letter. Through the hidden door, he could hear voices, Rachel's sharp tones, Mike's laughter, people discussing going out to dinner somewhere expensive to cheer Ryan up. James looked at the envelope in his hands, then at the wall of photographs showing his mother's double life. She'd sacrificed comfort and recognition to give him something more valuable. Authenticity, humility, genuine relationships built on character rather than wealth. But those genuine relationships had rotted from within. He broke the wax seal and began to read. My dearest James, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably feeling betrayed by my secrets. I understand that anger, and I accept it. But I hope you'll let me explain. When your father died, I had a choice to make. I was 32 years old, recently widowed with a 5-year-old son and a fortune I'd built through real estate investments. I could have raised you in that world of wealth, given you everything money could buy. But I'd seen what extreme privilege did to children. Their empathy eroded by insulation from consequences, their relationships transactional, their accomplishments empty because nothing was ever earned. I wanted better for you, but I also wanted you safe. Extreme wealth attracts extreme danger. Kidnapping, extortion, people who view a child as a ransom opportunity. So I created 2 lives. Linda Carter, modest teacher who raised you with library books and home-cooked meals, and L.R. King, real estate investor who built an empire in the shadows while you slept. The exhaustion nearly killed me more than once. But every time I wanted to quit, I'd watch you interact with other children, sharing toys without thought, defending the bullied, valuing people for who they were rather than what they had. And I knew the sacrifice was worth it. You grew into exactly the man I'd hoped. Kind, thoughtful, hard-working, principled. You chose teaching not because it paid well, but because you genuinely love helping young people learn. That pride I felt watching you graduate, take your first job, marry Rachel. That was worth more than any amount of money could buy. James paused, wiping tears from his eyes. His mother's voice came through so clearly in these words. He could almost hear her speaking them. But here's where I must be honest about something painful. Rachel and Mike have been betraying you, and you probably know that by now if Mr. Peterson has done his job. I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this particular pain. Victoria never loved you the way you deserved. She loved your steadiness, your decency, the way you made her feel morally superior to her cutthroat colleagues. But when her career accelerated and your income stayed modest, she began viewing you as a limitation rather than a partner. Mike offered her something you couldn't: social climbing, financial aggression, the ruthless ambition she'd always admired but felt guilty admiring in herself. Together, they represent everything I raised you not to become, but also everything our culture rewards. I won't tell you how to respond to their betrayal. That's your choice, your journey. But I will tell you this: true power isn't about revenge or domination. True power is about choosing your response to those who wrong you, about deciding what kind of person you'll be when you have every resource to be cruel, but every reason to be wise. The $90 billion I'm leaving you isn't just money. It's responsibility, legacy, opportunity. You can use it to destroy those who hurt you, or you can use it to build something meaningful. You can hide behind it like armor, or you can wield it like a tool for good. I vote for the latter, but again, it's your choice. The letter continued with practical advice about the management team, the properties, the legal complexities. But then it concluded with words that would stay with James forever. I'm proud of you, James. I'm proud of the man you became despite, or perhaps because of, the limitations I imposed. Those qualities make you rare, valuable, and yes, powerful in ways that transcend wealth. Use this inheritance wisely. Help people who can't help themselves. Build things that matter. Find love with someone who sees your worth beyond bank balances. And when you think of me, don't think of the secrets I kept, but of the love that motivated every choice I made. You are my immortality, James. Make me proud by being happy, purposeful, and true to yourself. All my love, forever and always. Mom. James read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the words by the second reading. He sat in his mother's chair, his chair now, and felt the weight of $90 billion settle on his shoulders like responsibility incarnate. Outside the office door, He heard Rachel's voice rise in irritation. He's been in there for over an hour. How long does it take to go through a dead woman's desk? We have dinner reservations. Mike's response was lower, but James caught the words, "Let him grieve," delivered with performative sympathy. James stood, tucked his mother's letter into his jacket pocket, and opened the door to face his betrayers, but not yet reveal what he knew. Victoria looked up as James emerged from the office, her expression mixing impatience with what she probably thought passed for concern. Finally, "Is everything okay? Did the lawyer just want to go through her papers?" James studied his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, with new eyes. The expensive watch that definitely wasn't a gift from him. The designer bag that cost more than his monthly salary. Mike had been subsidizing her lifestyle for months, maybe longer. "Everything's fine," James said quietly. "Just some paperwork about the house, insurance policies. Nothing urgent." Mike draped his arm around Rachel's shoulders, making James's jaw tighten. "See, babe? I told you it would be routine." Linda was organized. She probably had everything labeled and filed. She did, James agreed, thinking about the hidden room, the secret empire. She was very organized. The remaining funeral guests had filtered out. Rachel checked her watch, the expensive one, and sighed. Mike made reservations at Volterra for 7. "We thought you might want to get out of the house, take your mind off things." Volterra was the new Italian restaurant downtown, notoriously expensive with a months-long waiting list. James couldn't afford it on his salary, but apparently Mike could. "That's thoughtful," James said, meaning the opposite. "But I'm not really hungry. You two go ahead." Rachel's relief was palpable. "Are you sure? We don't want you to be alone tonight." "I'm sure. I need to go through Mom's things, start thinking about arrangements for the house." They left together, Rachel's hand finding Mike's, as soon as they thought they were out of James's sight line. Through the window, James watched them walk to Mike's BMW and drive away without looking back. James returned to his mother's office and opened the safe using the combination Mr. Peterson had provided. Inside, he found a private investigator's report. Reading it was like watching his marriage dissolve in clinical detail. Photographs of Rachel and Mike at hotels. Credit card statements showing Mike paying for Rachel's purchases. Text messages discussing James with contempt and mockery. Rachel calling him boring and stuck in the past. Mike referring to him as deadweight. Plans to divorce James after the funeral. To wait until the inheritance situation was resolved, then proceed with ending the marriage and beginning their real life together. What struck James most wasn't the affair itself, painful as that was, but the casual cruelty in their private communications. They didn't just not love him, they actively disdained him. His kindness was weakness. His dedication to teaching was lack of ambition. His care for his dying mother was emotional immaturity. James closed the report and spent the evening reading through property portfolios on his mother's computer system. As he navigated through spreadsheets and asset listings, the scope of his inheritance became increasingly real. Harbor Tower, where Mike lived in smug luxury, generated $47 million in annual revenue. The building had a waiting list for units, and Mike's penthouse cost $12,000 monthly. Summit Marketing Solutions headquarters, where Rachel worked as a senior account director, was a newer acquisition. The entire development was valued at $2.3 billion, and L.R. King Holdings owned it all. James thought about revenge, how easy it would be to evict Mike, to fire Rachel, to destroy them with a few strategic moves. The temptation was real, visceral, but his mother's letter echoed in his mind. True power is about choosing your response to those who wrong you. He wouldn't act immediately, James decided. He'd wait for Rachel to file divorce papers. He'd wait for them to make their move, secure in their assumption that he was exactly what they decided he was, a nice guy who'd inherited nothing but a modest house and some debt. He'd let them underestimate him one last time. Tomorrow, Mr. Peterson would return with the management team. Tomorrow, James would officially become one of the wealthiest people on earth. But tonight, he was still just a son mourning his mother and a husband facing the end of his marriage. And somehow that felt important, to sit with the pain, to feel it fully before power and money transformed everything. Mr. Peterson arrived at precisely 9 a.m. with 5 other people. The transformation in the lawyer's demeanor was striking. Yesterday, he'd been respectfully professional. Today, he radiated authority that suggested he was accustomed to managing billions. "James," he said warmly, "may I introduce you to your mother's executive team?" The introductions were surreal. Marcus Chun, Chief Investment Officer, who'd worked with Linda for 23 years. Jennifer Park, Chief Financial Officer, who'd been Linda's roommate at Harvard Business School. David Foster, Chief Legal Counsel. Patricia Lewis, Chief Operating Officer, who managed day-to-day operations of 372 properties. And finally, Raymond Torres, Chief Technology Officer. They gathered in the living room, but the space felt wrong for such a significant meeting. Too ordinary. James offered coffee, and then Mr. Peterson began the formal reading. The language was dense and legal, but the substance was clear. Linda Ruth King Carter left her entire estate, including 100% ownership of L.R. King Holdings, to her son James Thomas Carter. "Your mother left very specific instructions," Mr. Peterson explained. "She wanted you to have complete control, but she also wanted you to have time to learn the business before making major decisions. The executive team has authority to continue current operations for 6 months, during which time you'll receive intensive education about real estate investment and property management." Jennifer Park leaned forward, her expression kind but direct. "Your mother talked about you constantly, James. She was so proud of your work in education, your dedication to helping students. She believed those values, helping people access knowledge, creating opportunities, should inform how we manage this company going forward." "I appreciate that," James said, "but I'm not sure I'm qualified to run a $90 billion company. I've never taken a business class. I don't know anything about commercial real estate." "Your mother didn't either at first," Marcus Chun interrupted gently. "She inherited $2 million from your grandfather and turned it into this through 40 years of calculated risks, constant learning, and surrounding herself with people smarter than her in specific areas. She wasn't a genius. She was persistent, strategic, and willing to admit what she didn't know." "Also," David Foster added with a slight smile, "you're not running the company day to day. We are. You're the owner and ultimate decision maker, which means you set vision and values and strategic direction. But you're not processing lease agreements or negotiating with contractors." The concept helped, but James still felt overwhelmed. "What happens immediately? What I need to do this week?" Mr. Peterson outlined steps: meetings with financial advisors, transfers of accounts and assets, legal filings, security arrangements, media strategy, tax planning. The list was exhausting. Then Patricia Lewis said something that snapped his attention back. "We'll also need to address the situation with your wife and Mike Sullivan." The room went quiet. Everyone was looking at James with expressions that suggested they all knew. "I'm handling that personally," James said quietly, his voice carrying a firmness that surprised him. Patricia nodded, but continued carefully. "I ask because Harbor Tower and the Summit Marketing Complex are significant assets, and both Mike Sullivan and Rachel Carter have connections to those properties. If you're planning changes that might affect operations or tenants, we need to coordinate to ensure we're not creating legal exposure." James appreciated the professionalism, but also recognized the implicit question. "Are you going to use your power to destroy them?" "I'm not making any property decisions based on personal relationships," James said. "If changes happen, they'll be for legitimate business reasons." The meeting continued for 3 hours. By the time the executive team left, James's head was spinning with information. But one thing was crystal clear. His life had changed irrevocably. That afternoon, Rachel called. "Hey, can we talk? I'm coming by the house around 6. Her tone was carefully casual, but James heard the tension underneath. This was it, the divorce conversation. "Sure," James said, keeping his voice neutral. "I'll be here." Rachel arrived at exactly 6 p.m., but she wasn't alone. Mike was with her, and seeing them together in his house, technically his mother's house, technically now his house, felt like a violation. They stood in the entryway, Rachel holding a folder that James knew contained divorce papers before she even spoke. "James, we need to talk about our marriage," Rachel began, her voice taking on the patient, slightly condescending tone she used when explaining marketing concepts to people she considered less sophisticated. I think we both know things haven't been working for a while. Mike stood slightly behind her, his hand on her back in that possessive gesture James had noticed at the funeral. James said nothing, just waited, curious to see how they'd frame this. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Rachel continued, about what I want from life, about my career trajectory, about the kind of partnership I need to achieve my goals. And I know, that you and I want different things. You're a wonderful person, kind and thoughtful, but you're also... She paused, searching for words. You're comfortable with a smaller life. The teaching work, the quiet evenings, the modest lifestyle. That's not wrong, but it's not what I need anymore. What do you need? James asked quietly, genuinely curious. Ambition. Drive. Someone who understands the corporate world and the social expectations that come with success. Someone who's building something significant rather than maintaining something small. She glanced at Mike, who squeezed her shoulder encouragingly. Mike understands that world. We've become close over the past year, and I've realized that what Mike and I have, is the partnership I need. How long? James asked, though he knew the answer. Rachel had the grace to look uncomfortable. Does it matter? The point is that staying married would be unfair to both of us. 18 months, James said flatly, watching Mike's expression shift to surprise. You've been sleeping together for 18 months. You didn't plan it, but you've been actively pursuing it for over a year while living in my house, eating food I bought, accepting my support while my mother was dying. Rachel's face flushed. You had me follow? My mother did, James replied. She noticed things I was too trusting to see. She documented everything before she died. So let's skip the just happened narrative and be honest. You decided I wasn't successful enough for your reimagined life. Mike offered an upgrade, and you've been planning this divorce for months. The silence stretched taut. Then Mike laughed. Actually laughed to sound sharp and cruel. Okay, fine. Yes, Rachel and I are together. Yes, we've been planning to end your marriage so we can start ours. You want brutal honesty? Here it is. You're a nice guy, James, but you're also boring. You're stuck in a dead-end career, helping kids study history while the world passes you by. Rachel needs someone who's going places, and I'm making partner at one of the city's top investment firms. We're in the same league. You're playing a different game entirely. James felt something cold and hard crystallize in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. And the inheritance, is that a factor in your timing? Rachel lifted her chin defensively. Your mother was a teacher who died of cancer after expensive treatment. There's probably nothing left but this house and maybe some debt. I'm not entitled to much in terms of community property, and honestly, I don't want it. I want a clean break. Sign the papers, we'll sell the house, split proceeds, and we both move on. Rachel is being generous, Mike added. She could drag this out, fight for more, but she just wants it over quickly. We both do. So sign the papers tonight, and we can file tomorrow. Quick, clean, minimal drama. James looked at the divorce papers Rachel was holding, then at the two people who'd betrayed him with such casual cruelty. His mother's letter echoed in his mind. True power is about choosing your response to those who wrong you. No, James said simply. Rachel blinked. No, I'm not signing tonight. You want a divorce? Fine. File your papers, start the legal process. But I'm not making it quick or convenient for you. You've been lying to me for 18 months. You can wait a few weeks for your freedom. Mike's expression darkened. Don't be petty, James. This is happening whether you cooperate or not. Then it happens without my cooperation, James replied evenly. File your papers, Rachel, but do it properly through attorneys through the system. I'm not giving you the satisfaction of a same-day signature. Rachel's face twisted with frustration. Fine. You want to be difficult? My attorney will file tomorrow. Hope you enjoy what little you inherited, because when this is over, you'll be alone in an empty house with nothing but your textbooks and your dead mother's memory. They left together, but Mike paused at the door. For what it's worth, James, you should probably start looking for a new place. This house is worth maybe $400,000 in this market. After splitting proceeds and paying off your mom's medical debts, you'll have enough for a one-bedroom apartment somewhere cheaper. Might be time to grow up and face reality. James closed the door on Mike's laughter and Rachel's retreating footsteps. But he didn't feel angry or hurt. He felt clear, purposeful, ready. Tomorrow, Rachel would file for divorce. Tomorrow, Mike would go to work believing he'd won. Tomorrow, they'd both continue living their lives in buildings James owned, working in offices James controlled, secure in their assumptions about his powerlessness. And what happened after that depended entirely on what kind of person James chose to be. The 6 months following Rachel's divorce filing transformed James in ways that went far beyond wealth. The divorce proceeded through legal channels, with Rachel's attorney filing paperwork that claimed irreconcilable differences and requested equitable distribution of marital assets. Because James had inherited nothing during their marriage. The inheritance came after Linda's death, but before the divorce was finalized, Rachel's claims were limited to the house and whatever modest savings James had accumulated during their 6 years together. Her attorney estimated James's total net worth at approximately $380,000, mostly in home equity, and requested half. James's attorney, provided by Mr. Peterson and specializing in high-net-worth divorces, filed responsive paperwork that neither confirmed nor denied those figures. The strategy was simple. Let Rachel and Mike continue believing James was inheriting nothing significant while the divorce proceeded normally, then reveal the truth at the most strategically advantageous moment. Meanwhile, James began his intensive education in commercial real estate. The executive team designed a curriculum that was part MBA, part apprenticeship, and part strategic thinking workshop. Marcus Chun taught him investment fundamentals. Your mother never flipped properties, Marcus explained. She bought for decades-long holds, weathering market cycles because she understood that prime real estate in major cities only increases in value over time if properly maintained. Jennifer Park walked him through financial statements. The portfolio generates $3.7 billion in annual net income after expenses, taxes, and reserves. Your mother took minimal distributions, maybe $10 million annually, because she preferred compounding the wealth for your eventual inheritance. Patricia Lewis showed him the operational side, taking him to buildings across the portfolio, introducing him to property managers and maintenance teams. Your mother knew every significant building personally, Patricia said during a tour of a Seattle office complex. She'd visit quarterly, walk the properties, talk to tenants. The people who work in our buildings aren't abstractions. They're real people whose lives are affected by our decisions. Beyond the formal education, James continued his teaching work, refusing to quit despite the executive team's surprise. "This is who I am," James explained to Mr. Peterson. "My mother worked as a teacher while running this company. If she could balance both, so can I. The teaching work keeps me grounded, reminds me why wealth matters, because most people don't have it and struggle daily with problems money could solve." The divorce proceedings moved slowly, with Rachel growing increasingly frustrated at James's refusal to simply settle and be done. She'd moved in with Mike officially, living in his Harbor Tower penthouse, and her social media showed a life of luxury, expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Vancouver, charity galas where Seattle's elite gathered. But James also began making plans, strategic decisions about how to handle the inevitable revelation. "I want to meet with Harbor Tower's management," James told Patricia during one of their weekly strategy sessions, 6 months after his mother's death. "Not as the owner, just as an interested party touring the building. Can you arrange that?" Patricia's expression suggested she knew exactly what James was planning. "I'll set it up for next week." "What about Summit Marketing Headquarters?" "Same thing. Anonymous tour, neutral context. I want to see these places through their eyes before they know who I am." The Harbor Tower tour happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The property manager, a competent woman named Susan Kim, gave him the standard tour: luxury amenities, prime location, exclusive resident services. "Our penthouse units are particularly sought after," Susan explained. "Floor-to-ceiling windows, wraparound balconies, premium finishes. We have several high-profile residents who appreciate the lifestyle Harbor Tower provides." "What's the monthly cost for a penthouse?" James asked, knowing the answer. They start at $12,000 monthly, but our premier units go higher. Our residents consider it worth the investment for the prestige and location. What happens if a tenant violates their lease? James asked, thinking about Rachel living in Mike's unit. We have very strict lease terms, Susan replied. Violations result in warnings, and repeated violations can lead to eviction proceedings. That's rare among our residents. They understand the privilege of living here. What about subletting or unauthorized occupants? Absolutely prohibited. Leases are specific about who can occupy units. Unauthorized occupants are grounds for immediate lease termination. We conduct periodic inspections to ensure compliance. James filed that information away. Was Rachel listed on Mike's lease as an authorized occupant? Or was she there informally, in violation of terms Mike had agreed to? By the end of 6 months, James felt comfortable with the basics of his inheritance. More importantly, he decided what kind of owner he wanted to be. Not vengeful, but not naive either. Not cruel, but not passive. He would make decisions that were strategically sound and ethically defensible. And if those decisions happened to complicate life for people who'd betrayed him, that was consequence rather than revenge. I want to call a board meeting, James told the executive team. I have some policy changes I'd like to implement across the portfolio. What changes are you considering? Jennifer asked. James outlined his ideas. Stricter enforcement of lease terms across all residential properties, mandatory lease compliance reviews, enhanced tenant screening procedures. None of it was unusual or unreasonable. In fact, it was standard practice in well-managed real estate portfolios. But the timing and specific buildings where it would be enforced first would be very deliberate. Crown Tower and the Summit Complex, Marcus said, understanding the subtext. You want to start compliance reviews there first. I want to start everywhere eventually, James corrected, which was true. But yes, those seem like good test cases. High-value properties, established tenant bases. The executive team agreed to implement James's policies. Patricia pulled him aside afterward. You know, this will eventually expose Mike's situation with Rachel living in his unit without being on the lease. If he's violating his lease, James replied evenly, then that's his responsibility to address. We're not targeting him specifically. We're implementing portfolio-wide compliance reviews that happen to include Harbor Tower. If he's in compliance, there's no problem. If he's not, he has options to come into compliance or face consequences like any other tenant. Patricia studied him carefully. Your mother would be proud of how you're handling this. Firm but fair. Strategic but ethical. James hoped that was true, but he also knew the real test was coming, because the divorce trial was scheduled for next month, and eventually the truth about his inheritance would emerge. When it did, Rachel and Mike would realize they'd underestimated him catastrophically. The divorce trial began on a cold Tuesday in March, 11 months after Linda Carter's death. But the real drama started before they even entered the courtroom. Rachel's attorney, Margaret Price from Mike's firm, had filed aggressive discovery motions demanding full disclosure of James's assets, income, and inheritance. James's attorney, Lawrence Wu, had responded with meticulous documentation showing exactly what James had inherited. Complete ownership of L.R. King Holdings, valued at $93 billion. Margaret's office called Lawrence at 4:47 p.m. the day before trial. James was present for the call, which Lawrence put on speaker. This documentation can't be accurate, Margaret said, her voice tight with disbelief. You're claiming James Carter inherited $93 billion from his mother, a teacher. I'm not claiming anything, Lawrence replied calmly. I'm providing factual documentation of assets inherited. Linda Carter, also known professionally as L.R. King, was the founder and sole owner of L.R. King Holdings, one of the world's largest private real estate investment companies. James inherited the entirety of that estate upon her death. The silence lasted long enough that James thought the call had dropped. Then Margaret spoke again, her tone sharp. We'll need to continue the trial. This changes everything. Nothing has changed, Lawrence interrupted firmly. James inherited these assets after Mrs. Carter's death, but before divorce filing. Washington law is clear that inheritance is received during marriage, but not commingled with marital assets, remain separate property. Your client has no claim to any portion of the L.R. King estate. James heard voices in the background, urgent and angry. Then Mike's unmistakable tone. "Put me on the phone." "Mr. Sullivan," Lawrence said, "you're not a party to this divorce. Your participation is inappropriate." "James!" Mike's voice carried disbelief mixed with panic. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of negotiation tactic. Your mother was a teacher, for Christ's sake." James took control of the call, his voice quiet but firm. "My mother built a real estate empire over 40 years, Mike. She chose to live modestly to give me a normal childhood. But she was extraordinarily successful in ways neither you nor Rachel bothered to investigate before deciding I wasn't worth your respect." "Harbor Tower," Mike said suddenly, horror in his tone. "Wait, Harbor Tower, the building, you own it?" "On the company that owns it, yes. Along with 371 other properties globally, including the Summit Marketing Headquarters building where Rachel works." Rachel's voice joined the call, shrill with anger. "You lied to us. You let us file for divorce, thinking you had nothing." "I never lied," James replied calmly. "You assumed I'd inherited nothing without asking. You filed for divorce because you decided I wasn't successful enough for your ambitions. The size of my inheritance doesn't change the reasons you wanted to end our marriage. It just reveals that your judgment of my worth was spectacularly wrong. This is manipulation." Rachel shouted. "You manipulated us." "I did nothing except let you proceed with your stated wishes," James said. "You wanted a divorce. You got one. That my financial situation is different than you assumed doesn't change the fundamental reality that you stopped loving me, if you ever did, long before you knew anything about inheritance." Lawrence took control again. "The trial proceeds tomorrow as scheduled. Your client can attempt to argue for claims on the inheritance, but I assure you Washington case law is not on your side. I suggest you counsel your client to accept the settlement terms we proposed. Clean split of premarital assets, no ongoing support obligations, and a quick dissolution. Fighting this will be expensive and unsuccessful." Margaret ended the call without responding. That night, James couldn't sleep, not from anxiety, but from clarity. His phone buzzed constantly with messages. Rachel calling repeatedly, Mike texting apologies that felt opportunistic rather than genuine, even Rachel's parents reaching out with barely mass horror at their daughter's mistake. James ignored them all. The trial began at 9 a.m. in King County Family Court. Rachel sat at the plaintiff's table looking devastated but also calculating. Mike sat behind her in the gallery, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide his obvious distress. Judge Maria Rodriguez presided, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for fairness but impatience with manipulation. "This is a dissolution of marriage between Rachel and Carter and James Thomas Carter," she began, reviewing the case file. "However, there appears to be significant dispute about the value of assets involved." She looked at Margaret. "Counselor, you filed a motion yesterday for continuance. Explain." Margaret stood. "Your Honor, we recently discovered that Mr. Carter inherited a substantial estate, allegedly worth over $90 billion from his mother. We believe this should be considered an asset division." Judge Rodriguez turned to Lawrence. "Counselor, Your Honor, Washington law is unambiguous. Inheritances received during marriage remain separate property unless commingled with marital assets. Mr. Carter inherited L.R. King Holdings after his mother's death, which occurred before divorce filing, but during the marriage. He has not commingled these inherited assets with marital funds. They remain under his sole control. Mrs. Carter has no legal claim to any portion of the inheritance, regardless of its size. The timing is suspicious," Margaret argued. "Mrs. Carter filed for divorce unaware of this inheritance." "That's exactly the point," Lawrence interrupted. "Mrs. Carter filed for divorce believing Mr. Carter had inherited minimal assets. Her decision to end the marriage was made without consideration of his financial position, which demonstrates that her desire for divorce was based on personal rather than financial factors. She cannot now claim she deserves a portion of wealth she didn't know existed when she decided to end the marriage." Judge Rodriguez looked at Rachel directly. "Mrs. Carter, Is it true you filed for divorce believing your husband had inherited minimal assets from his mother? Rachel stood, her voice shaking. Yes, Your Honor, but that's because he never told me. Did you ask him about the inheritance before filing? No, but I assumed. You assumed, Judge Rodriguez repeated flatly. Did your husband ever misrepresent his financial situation to you? Rachel's silence was answer enough. Your Honor, Margaret tried to salvage the argument. The sheer scale of this inheritance, $93 billion, should factor into equitable distribution. The court has discretion within legal boundaries. Judge Rodriguez interrupted sharply. And those boundaries are clear. Inherited assets that remain separate are not subject to division in divorce proceedings. The size of the inheritance is irrelevant to its legal status. She paused. Mr. Wu, your settlement proposal? Lawrence outlined the terms. House sold, proceeds split equally, $190,000 each. Premarital savings divided, $35,000 each. No alimony. Total to Rachel, $225,000. That's nothing, Rachel exclaimed. He inherited $93 billion, and you're offering me $225,000. Judge Rodriguez's expression hardened. Mrs. Carter, you filed for divorce. You initiated these proceedings. You decided your marriage was over. The law protects your husband's inheritance because it is a separate property earned by his mother through decades of work before you even met him. What exactly do you think you're entitled to? Rachel had no answer. Mrs. Carter, I strongly advise you to accept this settlement. If you proceed to trial, you will lose, and you'll have spent considerable money for the privilege of losing. Take the settlement, end your marriage, and learn from this experience. But Rachel's face had transformed to fury. Mike stood in the gallery. This is absurd. The ethical thing would be to give her at least $1 billion. Mr. Sullivan, Judge Rodriguez snapped. You are not a party to this proceeding. Sit down and remain silent, or I will have you removed. She turned to Rachel. Last chance. Accept the settlement or proceed to trial. What's your decision? Rachel shook her head stubbornly. I want what I'm entitled to. If that means trial, fine. Lawrence looked at James, who nodded slightly. Then we'll see you at trial, Your Honor. The 6 weeks between the first hearing and the trial were chaotic. The portfolio-wide compliance review James had initiated reached Harbor Tower, and the results were precisely what he'd anticipated. Mike's lease explicitly prohibited unauthorized occupants, but Rachel had been living in a unit full-time for over 8 months without being added to the lease agreement. Susan Kim, the property manager, called Mike personally to address the violation, professionally and consistently with how similar situations were handled throughout the building. Mike had 3 options: add Rachel to the lease through proper application, requiring background checks and reference verification, have Rachel move out immediately, or face lease termination proceedings. Mike chose to add Rachel to the lease, but the application process revealed concerning details about Rachel's credit history: high debt ratios, multiple credit cards near their limits, a history of late payments. Combined with the lease violation and the fact that Mike was already stretching to afford the $12,000 monthly rent, the building's management questioned whether adding another occupant made financial sense. James stayed removed from decision-making, but ensured Susan had clear authority to enforce policies consistently. When Susan recommended approving Rachel's addition conditional on a rent increase to $14,500 monthly, standard for 2-occupant penthouses, James's only instruction was, treat this exactly as you'd treat any other tenant. Mike paid the increased rent, but the financial strain was obvious. Meanwhile, at Summit Marketing headquarters, Patricia Washington initiated lease renewal discussions with Rachel's employer. The current lease was expiring in 8 months, and Summit Marketing wanted to expand but would face a 35% rent increase to market rates. The company's CFO decided to implement cost-cutting measures, and Rachel's position was identified as potentially redundant. She was offered a choice: accept a lateral move with reduced compensation or take a severance package. Rachel chose the severance, but her job search struggled in the competitive tech sector. James felt no satisfaction watching their circumstances deteriorate, but no guilt either. These weren't targeted attacks. They were natural consequences of business decisions made by professional managers following standard practices. 3 days before trial, Margaret called Lawrence with a settlement request. Rachel would accept the original offer if James agreed to a mutual non-disclosure agreement. "Tell Margaret I'll agree," James told Lawrence, "on one condition. It's mutual. Rachel can't discuss me, my inheritance, or our marriage publicly either. Both of us move forward privately, or neither of us has protection." Margaret agreed immediately. The settlement was finalized 3 days before trial, dissolving the marriage and dividing assets exactly as proposed. Rachel received $225,000 from marriage to one of the wealthiest people on earth. 3 years later, James stood in the newly renovated computer lab at Lincoln High School, watching students excitedly explore the interactive learning spaces his foundation had funded. The real satisfaction came from seeing his mother's name on the dedication plaque. 3 years after inheriting L.R. King Holdings, James had transformed both the company and himself, but the core values his mother instilled remained unchanged. He'd continued working at the high school part-time, using his position to identify needs wealth could address. The L.R. Carter Foundation focused on 3 areas: education and literacy, affordable housing, and opportunities for people overlooked by traditional systems. James had endowed scholarships for first-generation college students, funded workforce development programs, and converted properties into affordable housing that wouldn't be displaced by gentrification. The company had grown to 412 properties worth approximately $118 billion. But James had implemented policies his mother would have approved of: fair wages for all employees, environmental sustainability standards, tenant protections, and community investment requirements for every acquisition. Mike and Rachel had married 18 months after the divorce, but their relationship struggled under financial pressures. Mike made partner at his firm, but discovered the title came with expectations that strained his abilities. Rachel found work at a smaller marketing company, but never regained her previous status. James heard updates occasionally, but felt no satisfaction in their struggles and no desire for reconciliation. They'd made choices. He'd made different choices. Everyone lived with consequences. His anger had faded to indifference, which felt healthier than sustained rage. What James did feel was gratitude for his mother's sacrifice, for lessons learned through betrayal, for the opportunity to use wealth meaningfully. He dated carefully over the 3 years, wary of people who saw his money before his character. The executive team had introduced him to Maya Patel, a nonprofit director in education advocacy who had no idea who James was when they met at a policy conference. Their relationship developed slowly, built on shared values rather than wealth-based attraction. "Your mother would be proud," Mr. Peterson said, joining James at the school dedication. "You took an inheritance that could have corrupted you and used it to honor her legacy." James thought about the day he'd learned the truth, the hidden office, the secret empire, the double life. "I think about what she sacrificed constantly, the comfort she could have enjoyed, the recognition she deserved. She gave all that up for me. And you're giving back by being exactly the person she raised you to be," Mr. Peterson replied. "Wealthy, yes, but also kind. Powerful, but also principled. That's rarer than you might think, James. Wealth reveals character rather than creating it." Later, James visited his mother's grave. The cemetery was quiet in the late afternoon light, and he sat beside Linda Carter's simple headstone. "I met with Mike last month," James said quietly. "He reached out asking for advice about a legal problem. Not related to me, just genuine career trouble. I helped him because it was the right thing to do. I think you'd approve of that choice." The wind moved through trees overhead. Rachel actually apologized. 6 months ago, out of nowhere, she sent a letter saying she'd been in therapy and realized how badly she'd treated me. She asked for forgiveness, but said she didn't expect it. I wrote back telling her I forgave her years ago, that holding anger was exhausting, and that I hoped she found happiness. I meant it. The hardest lesson James had learned was that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. He could release resentment without inviting people back into his life. He could acknowledge humanity without rebuilding trust. Forgiveness was about his own peace rather than their redemption. The company's doing well, James continued. We acquired properties in 3 new countries this year, all meeting your ethical standards. Jennifer says we're on track to hit $120 billion valuation by year end. But honestly, the numbers feel less important than what we're doing with them. That was the truth James had discovered. Wealth was a tool, not an identity. He could use it to build, to help, to create opportunities, or he could let it isolate and corrupt him. The choice was daily, constant, requiring vigilance and values his mother had spent 33 years instilling. I miss you, James said finally, touching the cold granite. Every day I miss you. But I understand now why you did things the way you did. You gave me something more valuable than money. You gave me character, empathy, the ability to see people as people rather than assets or obstacles. That's the real inheritance, Mom. The $90 billion was just your way of ensuring I'd have resources to match the values you taught me. James stood and walked back to his car. Not the Toyota his mother had driven, but not anything ostentatious either. A comfortable sedan, practical and reliable, reflecting who he was rather than what he had. Maya waited in the passenger seat, having given him privacy. When he slid behind the wheel, she took his hand silently. They drove back to Seattle together, past Harbor Tower where Mike and Rachel struggled, past the Summit Marketing Building where Rachel no longer worked, past properties James owned, but that felt less like possessions and more like responsibilities. The city lights reflected off Puget Sound as the sun set, beautiful and indifferent to the dramas unfolding within its boundaries. James thought about the question his mother had posed in her letter. What kind of person will you be when you have every resource to be cruel, but every reason to be wise? 3 years later, he had an answer. The same person he'd always been, but with expanded capacity to help others, to build meaningful things, to honor his mother's sacrifice by living according to her values. The money hadn't changed him. It had revealed him. And what it revealed was someone his mother would recognize, still kind, still principled, still genuinely caring about people beyond their utility. James Mitchell, son, teacher, and reluctant billionaire, had inherited an empire. But he'd also inherited something more valuable, the wisdom to use it well. In a world where extreme wealth often revealed the worst of human nature, that wisdom made him not just rich, but genuinely successful in ways that transcended any balance sheet. His mother's legacy lived on, not in the buildings she'd acquired or the billions she'd accumulated, but in the sons she'd raised to value people over profits, principle over prestige, and kindness over conquest. That was the real inheritance, and it was worth more than $90 billion could ever buy. The end. Thank you so much for watching this incredible story. If you enjoyed James's journey from betrayed teacher to billionaire philanthropist, please smash that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of karma, revenge, and redemption. Drop a comment below telling us. Would you have handled things differently? Should James have been harsher on Rachel and Mike? What's the most valuable lesson from this story? Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. We have more jaw-dropping stories coming your way every week. Share this video with friends who love stories about justice and karma. They won't believe how this turned out. Thanks for being part of our community. Until next time, remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in character. See you in the next story. Clapperboard sparkles.